Okay. All right. Good morning. Last week we looked at Isaiah 50, verses 4 through 11. Remember? Looking at the third servant song. And we saw that those verses were describing the servant, the obedient and suffering servant, if you remember. And we see in the third Isaiah song here, or the third servant song in Isaiah here, that the servant was a prophetic figure who was said to suffer, yet they remain obedient and they are ultimately vindicated by God. Do you remember? We talked about that. And we looked at two different interpretations as to who or what this servant was according to these verses. One verse interpretation we looked at was the messianic view, and that pointed to Christ, who suffered unjustly, yet he listened to and obeyed the Father, and he was ultimately vindicated. Remember that? And of course, the other interpretation is that faithful Israel was represented by the servant, who they suffer unjustly, but they remain committed to God, and ultimately they will be justified. So we read prophecies concerning both of those viewpoints. This morning we're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 51 and how it fits into our study of the four servant songs mentioned in Deutero-Isaiah. Now, chapter 51 of Isaiah is a very significant, a very important chapter, and it's actually one of my favorites to study. It's significant because it echoes and foreshadows major biblical themes. And that's why when you hear preaching on it, if you hear preaching on it anymore, it links prophecy and the history of Israel to the unfolding plan of God's redemption for the nation of Zion. And you have to look forward and back in order to put it all into a proper perspective, so you don't hear too much preaching on it. As a matter of fact, one of the best sermons I've heard about a portion of that chapter was actually Sheldon Emery did that. It was called Eyes Only. That was actually one of his few video sermons. So Eyes Only actually covers chapter 51 of Isaiah. And we'll also see other elements in this study as we look at this chapter, which would be faith, redemption, comfort brought to the Israel people, and of course we'll see tied into all this is the gospel of Christ right in Isaiah 51. And the chapter actually bridges the theme of the servant from chapter 50 to Zion, and it actually goes right on into chapters 52 and 53. So it may seem out of place when studying the servant in the way that we've been studying it, but you'll see after this morning's study, we'll find that it does successfully bridge the theme of the servant from 50 on into 52. We'll see that this morning. So chapter 50 was focused on the servant's obedience. Now in chapter 51, the focus shifts to God's faithful remnant. The servant does not speak here, but the people who might be the servant are addressed. And we'll find out who exactly is being addressed in Isaiah 51 this morning. So let's look at verses 1 and 2 of Isaiah 51. Hearken to me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord. Look unto the rock whence you are hewn, and to the hole of the pit whence you are digged. Look unto Abraham your father, and unto Sarah that bare you, for I called him alone, and blessed him, and increased him. All right, now, who is being addressed here? You who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord, right? These phrases are not pointing to Israel as a whole, are they? No. But rather who? A faithful majority, a faithful minority within Israel. Of course, we're getting ahead of ourselves. How do we know this is Israel? Right? But people who desire God's ways, even in the midst of, at this time, exile. We could even say, if we stretch this into end-time prophecy, it would be the minority of Israelites who believe and stick to God's law in the midst of captivity. We're still doing the Babylonian captivity, right? Okay, put this into context historically. And of course, that would be those who are currently under the captivity of Mystery Babylon, right? Does that fit? All right. Look unto the rock whence you are hewn, and to the hole of the pit you are digged. It's instructing us as the faithful remnant to what? Look back at your origin. Look back to where you came from, right? Okay. Look unto Abraham, your father, and Sarah, and unto Sarah that bare you. All right. This must be a physical lineage of Israelites then, right? From whom? Abraham and Sarah. Now, their son was the son of Isaac, the son of promise. So is this Ishmaelites this verse is applied to? No. You can claim Abraham as your father as an Ishmaelite, but you cannot claim Abraham and Sarah as your parents unless you are an Israelite. So this is addressed to whom? The remnant of Israel who seeks after the Lord and follows his ways, whose father and mother are Abraham and Sarah. Is that correct? And of course, the Israelites being spoken of here, the people to whom this is addressed are being told to look back at their history. Right? This will all start to make sense. It's where this is insinuated here that there's something to do with Genesis 12. Covenantal promises. Right? All right. Now, just as God miraculously multiplied Abraham, remember, father of many nations, God is implying that he will do something with Israel likened to that, right? Something with Israel, because you understand, in our history here, at the time of Isaiah, they've been scattered into the exile, right? God's talking about a restorative plan, and he's going to show us that it's modeled after something he did to Abraham. And you'll see this a lot as you go through Isaiah 51. You have to understand your history in order to understand God's future plans for his people, because these will serve as a model for us. All right? Restoration. So God's telling us to look back at the Abrahamic covenant, right? Why? Isaiah 51:3. For the Lord shall comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. All right? God's telling us, you go back and look at the Abrahamic covenant to Abraham and Sarah, your parents. You go back and find out your history, because God's going to do something in the kingdom because of the kingdom. Right? That's what he's telling us. So, there will be comfort here. And of course, notice the language here is a new creation. You see that? So there will be a restoration. There will be like a return to Eden. You see that? And of course, other prophecies found elsewhere attest to this new creation. All right, Revelation 21, 1 through 5. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I'm not going to stop and give an exegesis of these verses this morning, because I feel you all understand what this is describing, right? One thing that does help us to understand this more fully is that the future described in Isaiah 51 is the very same future we're reading about here. That helps a lot to understand that it's all the same future. It's the same city, and we'll see Jerusalem once we get a little further into Isaiah 51 this morning. This is the same people, the same promise, the same to return to Eden, the same restoration being spoken of in Isaiah 51. Isaiah 51, by the way, is end-time prophecy. Okay? And I heard a voice of heaven, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. This is the true worship of Jehovah God now, you see? And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. So these are the new things God intends to do with his people. He's telling us to look back at the promises of Abraham. He's reminding us of these things. So this is the same future being spoken of a restored kingdom, where new things will come to pass. So this would be an Edenic restoration, just as we read in Isaiah 51, right? Okay. And just as we saw in Isaiah as well, we saw that the joy, gladness, and thanksgiving will be found there, right? Thanksgiving in the voice of melody. God says he'll wipe away all tears, and there will be no sorrow or death. So once again, we understand that this is exactly what Isaiah is describing. Hosea also says that Israel will come to a new place with singing and dancing, right? That's what Hosea tells us. And other places in Isaiah chapter 35 tells us that this land in which Israelites are promised will be a desert made new, right? It'll be a desert land, but it'll be like a garden or a fruitful place, right? So this is prophecy after prophecy after prophecy we could quote attesting to this new thing God intends to do in the earth as a plan, as part of a plan of restoration for his people. Isaiah 51 verse 4, hearken unto me, my people, and give ear unto me, O my nation. So who is this? Israel. For a law shall proceed from me, and I will make my judgment to rest for a light of the people. Okay, for a light of the people. Okay? Law here means both in divine instruction as well as Mosaic law. Okay? And once again, we understand that this must apply to Israel. They're the ones being spoken of here. And of course, Israel is a servant nation. Part of that commission is what? To be a light to the nations. Correct? Okay, so it all fits. We've seen plenty of evidence of this throughout our study of the servant already. So Isaiah 51, 5 and 6. My righteousness is near, my salvation has gone forth, mine arm shall judge the people, the isle shall wait upon me, and to mine arm shall they trust. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, and look upon the earth beneath, for the heavens shall vanish away like smoke, and the earth shall wax old like a garment, and they that dwell therein shall die in like manner, but my salvation shall be forever, and my righteousness shall not be abolished. Now, there are some churches that actually teach this verse is telling us about a future where the earth will literally go up in smoke. Okay, it'll be turned to ash. Seventh-day Adventists use this a lot to say that there will be he's talking about a new heaven and a new earth, so of necessity the old one must vanish. This is prophecy. So this is they will be reformed. Okay, reformed. It won't disappear. Now, notice righteousness and salvation are linked here. Of course, we have salvation mentioned in the Old Testament. I always take time to mention that. And arm here is what? God's power, but we're also seeing an initiative. God plans to do something. He's going to do it directly, right? Well, he's contrasting what here? What's God doing? He's contrasting temporal or earthly creations with the eternal nature of his righteousness, his salvation, right? And of course, we know it was God's arm that brought salvation, was it not? Okay. So according to Peter in the New Testament, the heavens and earth will pass, but righteousness will dwell in the new creation. Peter must have understood this, right? Okay, so God here is revealing a plan of salvation and righteousness that is to come to the nations. And since many of these verses are quoted throughout the New Testament, we can easily see that this is applying to Jesus' earthly ministry then, right? So it would have been a function of Jesus' ministry on earth. Isaiah 51, 7 and 8. Hearken unto me, ye that know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. Fear ye not the reproach of men, neither be you afraid of their revilings. For the moth shall eat them up like a garment, and the worm shall eat them like wool. But my righteousness shall be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. Now, notice here, and right off the bat, we can understand who it is that's being addressed in this verse. Who is that? In verses, we've gone from, in verses 1 and 2, it was you who pursue righteousness, and you who seek the Lord, right? Now it's those in whose heart is my law, right? Or those who have internalized God's law, which is speaking of what? The new covenant, right? The new covenant, Jeremiah 33. You go to Ezekiel and read about it as well. Hebrews 8, okay? The new covenant. So this is directly addressing people of the new covenant community, right? Or heirs to the promise. If you go with New Testament theology, who have God's laws written on their hearts. Is that correct? Now it's addressing the remnant of Israel in this age. All of a sudden, you see? And here that we're told what? We are told that we will have opposition, right? But we're not to fear. Why? Because that opposition, The reproach and the revilings of men is temporary, right? It will perish. But God's redemption and salvation are eternal. Once again, you see these things contrasted just like in the previous verses. The moths and worms, of course, are symbolic of judgment. Judgment, okay? And much like the verses we've looked at earlier, the eternal is emphasized over the temporary. Okay? Now remember, these verses are to comfort Zion. To comfort Zion. Who? People, the heirs of the promise. Zion. As apparently to Isaiah, it's all the same people. Right? Okay. So, Isaiah 51, 9, 10, and 11. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient days, as in the generations of old. Art thou not it that hath cut Rahab and wounded the dragon? Art thou not which hath dried the sea, the waters of the great deep, that hath made the depths of the sea a way for the ransomed to pass over? Notice ransomed, passed over. Therefore, the redeemed of the Lord shall return and come with singing unto Zion. And everlasting joy shall be upon their head, and they shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and mourning shall flee away. It sounds like what John saw in Revelation, did it not? It's the same future. It's the same people. It's the same plan of redemption and restoration. It starts to repeat itself over and over and over again. So, in previous sermons, we've actually gone and done word definitions for this Rahab. Do you remember? Rahab was symbolic of what? It's an old name for Egypt. Egypt, okay? And you'll notice, and that does make sense. Rahab here is not out of place. It's an ancient name for Egypt, and we're told to look back in our history in the ancient days of old, and then he's talking about waters of the deep, a way to pass over them. The book of Exodus, right? The book of Exodus. Okay. And that's the context. The book of Exodus. So we were told previously to look back at our history because God's going to do something with Zion and the kingdom. Now he's calling us back to Exodus 15 actually. All right? And of course, the restoration of Zion apparently is modeled after God's triumph over Pharaoh. Right? Okay. So the coming redemption is modeled after this. So God will do what then? He's reminding us that he will intercede for Israel as he once did. Right? Of course, dragon here is not the creature of myth. Okay? I almost said literal dragon. But then nobody's going to mention a literal dragon because there literally have to be dragons. So yes, it's not the creature of myth. All right? Dragons are what? Even in Revelation. Symbolic of powers that oppose the kingdom. All right? Okay. Wounded the dragon. And remember, it just goes on and on and on. There's many, many, many layers of prophecy here. But remember, there is the dragon that's wounded in Revelation, and the whole earth looked after it. Remember? Powers that oppose the kingdom. Powers that are opposed to God's people. All right? Okay. So the arm of the Lord defeats that completely by the end of the age. Is that correct? Okay. Now, like I said, we have a direct reference here of the Red Sea crossing, an event described in Exodus. And of course, in 1 Corinthians, if you look that up, chapter 12, I think, Paul says that the crossing was symbolic of baptism. Remember that? Yeah. Okay. But why mention the history from the book of Exodus here? Why do any of this? Well, as we know, Isaiah 51 is addressed to Israelites, so God is telling these people their own history. He's telling us our own history, right? And remember, we were to look back to Abraham from where we came from, because God's going to do something in the kingdom with Zion. And here, Exodus is mentioned because there will be a new Exodus, right? A new Exodus. Now, where were we going when we left Egypt? The promised land. So you see here now, it's very easily in time prophecy. He said, I'm going to do something with you Israelites, much like I did in the ancient days. I'm going to conquer the dragon once and for all. And after that, you'll go singing and dancing into your own land. It'll be restored like Eden. This is what I have in mind for you Israelites. I did it once in the old times, I'll do it again. This is to comfort Zion in the midst of Babylonian exile or Babylonian captivity. Okay, very easy. Layer after layer after layer. So the prophetic Zion will be restored completely. Now, there's 3 layers here. This prophetic Zion will be restored. This was partially fulfilled when Ezra and Nehemiah went and rebuilt, was it not, in the time of Isaiah? So this would have been a source of comfort to the people Isaiah would have been speaking to directly then, because it was partially restored with Ezra and Nehemiah, the high priests. In this age, does this apply to us as well? Yes. Mystery Babylon will be put down once and for all, and we will have a new place called Jerusalem, which we'll get to, where we will be restored unto God. All right? And that will be the ultimate fulfillment of this end-time prophecy. Of course, Hebrews 12 tells us it would be this restored city as a city where the redeemed live. Right? So even the writer of Hebrews understood these things. So the future deliverance of Israel is based on the past deliverance of Israel. You see why we're told to look back now. Isaiah 51 verses 12 and 13. I, even I am. Notice the repetition. Who's that? Christ. The I am is he that comforteth you. Who art thou that thou shouldest be afraid of a man that shall die, and of the Son of Man which shall be made of grass, and forgettest the Lord thy Maker, that has stretched forth the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth, and is feared continually every day because of the fury of the oppressor, as if he were ready to destroy. And where is the fury of the oppressor? So, the I am is he who comforts us, right? And of course, we're to be comforted because men, worldly powers, the opposition spoken of earlier is fleeting, right? And we're to trust in God and his sovereign power. And where's the oppressor? You see that? That is implying what? Where is the oppressor? That his time is short. His end is near, right? 1 hour with the beast, end time prophecy. Okay. So there is to be a liberation from all of the opposition, the exile, the captivity that Israel is currently in Isaiah's time and in this age, correct? He's telling us of that. Isaiah 51, 14 and 15. The captive exile hasteneth that he may be loosed, and they should not die in the pit, nor that his bread should fail. But I am the Lord thy God that divided the sea, whose waves roared. The Lord of hosts is his name. You see, so the captives, the exiles, they will be speedily released. Right? Now, what was it that Jesus said when he read from Isaiah 61 during his ministry? We were talking about this morning in Luke. That he set free captives, right? And of course, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, freedom, right? So, setting free captives was part of Jesus' earthly mission. That's what he said. And once again, we have imagery from Exodus showing us that God has sovereignty over his creation, right? So yes, this is a time when the captive exiles want to be speedily released, right? Isaiah 51:16. And I have put my words in thy mouth, and I have covered thee in the shadow of mine hand, that I may plant the heavens and lay the foundations of the earth, and say unto Zion, thou art my people. Now, I have put my words in thy mouth. Who? God has put his words in whose mouths? Apparently, the people of Zion. Now, this starts to sound an awful lot like the rest of the servant's commissions we've been reading about. That God would bestow upon his servant divine instruction. Upon whose heart is my law. Right? God has put his words in our mouths. He has protected us that he may plant the heavens and lay the foundations of the earth. So he's had this plan this whole time. This redemptive plan of his started all the way back to where? Eden. All the way back. Okay. Because I had a private school teacher tell me once, if Adam and Eve hadn't messed up, we'd still be in the Garden of Eden. Okay, I argued with her and got sent to the office. And that was the end of that. So, this servant then has everything to do with God's plans concerning Zion. You see? That's why Isaiah 51 is not out of place. That's why Isaiah 51 bridges the gap very effectively between the third servant song found in Isaiah 50 and the fourth servant song found in Isaiah 52. You see? So, this is talking about the how, the why of it. Isaiah 51, verses 17 through 23. Awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem. Now notice, the city name has changed, but the people being addressed hasn't. Must be the same place. O Jerusalem, which has drunk at the hand of the Lord of the cup of his fury, thou hast drunken the dregs of the cup of trembling and wrung them out. Drunken the dregs of the cup, which means they've drank the entire cup of the Lord's wrath, right? So he's talking about the judgment that's upon the Israel people now. It would be the exile they found themselves in. There is none to guide her among all the sons whom she hath brought forth, neither is there any that taketh her by the hand of all the sons she has brought up. These two things are coming to thee, who shall be sorry for thee? Desolation and destruction, and the famine, and the sword, by whom shall I comfort thee? Thy sons have faded, they lie at the head of all the streets, as a wild bull in a net. They are full of the fury of the Lord, the rebuke of thy God. Therefore hear now this, thou afflicted and drunken, but not with wine. Thus saith the Lord, and the Lord thy God, that pleadeth the causes of his people, behold, I have taken out of thine hand the cup of trembling, even the dregs of the cup of my fury. Thou shalt no more drink it again. But I will put it to the hand of them that afflict thee, which have said to thy soul, bow down, that we may go over. And thou hast laid thy body as the ground, and as the street to them that went over. Okay, a whole lot of things going on here, right? The cup of wrath that God has made Jerusalem drink is, of course, symbolic of judgment. Right? But this is not the end for God's people, is it? Of course, Jerusalem is symbolic of God's people. They're the ones being addressed here. But there will be an end of judgment for God's people, and the cup of wrath is transferred or poured out upon whom? God's enemies, right? Enemies of the Israel people. Now, there are many, many, many verses in the minor and major prophets that attest to this. Amos, Obadiah come to mind as well, about the destruction of Edom. As a matter of fact, in other parts of the book of Isaiah, you'll actually see this cup being handed to Esau, Edom. Okay? So, as part of God's redemptive plan for Israel, there will be judgment. Then that judgment will end, and what is to follow is the vindication of the Israel people, right? Very simply, that's what we're talking about here. So you see, Isaiah 51 is God's comfort for Zion and the faithful remnant. Now here's a quick overview of what we looked at in Isaiah 51 this morning. Okay? Verses 1 through 8 of Isaiah 51, we have calls to listen, and those are addressed to the righteous, right? Or those who are pursuing God's law and justice. In verses 9, 10, and 11, we see that God will act on behalf of Israel as he did in the Exodus. Remember, he mentioned the Red Sea, Rahab, Egypt, and all that. Verses 12 through 16, God then reassures Israel that he is their comfort and redeemer. Of course, this illustrates thus the I am. That sometime in the future, there would be somebody responsible for the salvation of his people. He would come from the arm of the Lord, right? Of course, it's verses 17 through 23, which we just read. Jerusalem is under judgment, yes, but with the promise that her suffering will end and restoration will follow. Now you can understand why these would be words of comfort to the people that found themselves in the exile, or at this end of the age, believing Israelites who find themselves under the captivity of Mystery Babylon, right? So, what exactly does Isaiah chapter 51 do for our study of the servant songs found in Isaiah? Isaiah 50 was about the obedient and suffering servant, you'll remember. Chapter 51 addresses the remnant of Israel directly, and it tells them to have comfort and to take courage because God has plans for the redemption and restoration. You see? And then, as we'll see next week, as we look into chapter 52, the fourth and final servant song, that we're going to see a shift from the servant's suffering, or the cup of wrath. We're going to see a shift from that. Not the servant suffering, I'm sorry. We're going to see a shift from the remnant's suffering, the cup of wrath that we just read about in Jerusalem, go to deliverance. You see? Now, the how of it is found in the function of the next servant song. The how of it. Okay? And just as we've seen in our study, the servant's disposition has gone from suffering and humiliation to exaltation. Okay? So if Christ is the servant, he fulfills all roles. Isaiah chapter 50, as the obedient sufferer, right? The bearer of good news and the exalted one, to whom God redeems. And we'll see that in chapter 52. If the remnant of Israel is the servant, they too mirror Christ's journey, do they not? Suffering in captivity and exile, and of course a people awaiting vindication. You see how those two run concurrently, conceptually. So the idea of a suffering but hopeful Zion in chapter 51 bridges the servant's role and function from Isaiah 50 to Isaiah 52, where comfort is spoken here. The comfort spoken of here is made possible by the servant. See, it may be a little confusing, I know. But in order to bridge the gap between Isaiah 50, 51, 52, we have to understand that Isaiah 51 is talking to the remnant of Israel, and it's a message of hope and comfort because God has a plan of restoration for them. Okay? As the servant, they are awaiting vindication because they've suffered. Correct? That's the why of it. The how it all comes together is found in Isaiah 52, which we'll get to next week. Okay? So I know that's a bit of a cliffhanger for you. But study up on Isaiah 52 next week. Now I will let you know this. If you open Isaiah 52, verses 1 through 12 continues to address the suffering Zion. Okay? The chapter break doesn't stop this message. The fourth servant song actually begins in Isaiah 52, verse 13. Okay? We'll get to that next week. We'll resume. All right? Until then, that's all I have for today.